Yo, what's going on, you guys? Your boy Devon Terrell in raw form, and welcome to another Help Me Devon raw tutorial. And today, in this Help Me Devon raw tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to mix vocals over a 2-track beat. A beat that is probably mastered, a beat that is probably extremely loud, that is clipping as soon as you bring it in. I'm going to show you exactly how to basically work around that and to move and maneuver when you have that. 3 tips for you. Let's get right to it. Okay, so this is a beat that I got from a producer named Ty Stees or Tyler Ron. It's to a song of mine that isn't out yet. I'm gonna play you this instrumental just for what it is, like how he sent it, so you can get an idea of what it sounds like and what it looks like on our meters. So pay attention to those 2 things, what it looks like on our meters and what it sounds like. Watch close. Okay, so if you look at that 2-track beat, you can basically see that it is very loud. It's pretty much clipping. It's hitting at 0, which means that if I introduce any other sound sonically, I'm talking about an EQ, I'm talking about a vocal, I'm talking about even if I add a little sound effect, it's going to be clipping on my main master bus as far as the channel is concerned. So this is where we run into tip number 1. And tip number 1 is basically gain staging or clip gaining, which I've explained in previous tutorials. Now, what do I mean when I say this? Long story short, I know what you're thinking. Hey, it's loud. So why can't you just come right over here to the 2-track, which is the track that the instrumental is on, and just turn it down, right? So let's turn it down to 5, let's go 6 dB. Let's turn it down 6 dB and let's listen to what we got. Listen close. Okay, we did it, right? Wrong, we actually didn't. So all we did was, yes, we turned down the signal that is feeding to the actual stereo master bus, right? But what you're not realizing is that if I introduce a plugin onto this actual 2-track, we're still gonna be clipping. Let me explain to you. So let's move on over to the actual inserts of the plugin. And let's put a simple EQ here, right at the top, and let's boost 2 dB at 60 hertz, which in my opinion is something that is kind of common, right? To get more boom out of the kick. So let's boost it, let's boost it 2.5 dB, right? Let's boost it about 2.5 dB. Now what I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to 2 things. I want you to pay attention to the actual 2-track fader that we turned down 6 dB, and I want you to look at the actual output from the plugin itself, okay? So look at this meter over here, which is the output from the plugin itself. You see me circling this right here. And then I want you to pay attention to the actual meter as far as what the 2-track is on. Watch closely. Okay, so you notice that it is clipping in the plugin, which is right here. You see these red clips right here. And then on the actual fader, it's not clipping at all. And it's actually going to the stereo master, not with no clipping as well. Here's your issue. You're not gain staging or you're not clip gaining your actual instrumental. What's happening here is everything that is coming into the inserts or into the basically the plugins of the 2-track, that signal is still at its peak volume. It's pretty much still at the volume that the producer sent it to you. When you're moving this fader, that fader is post. It's a post fader, okay? This fader is basically affecting signal after your inserts. So if you don't attack the problem before it even comes into the board or into the track, you're basically gonna get the same thing. It's not gonna actually change the actual signal that has come into this track. So how do we fix this? So what we do is we do something called clip gain. And basically what clip gain, and this is for my Pro Tools users, I'll show you for other DAWs as well. You come right over here, and from the actual audio signal, we clip gain, let's say we clip gain it to about 7.5 dB, right? Okay, so we clip gain it to about 7.5 dB. Now what I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to the meters on this EQ now. Look what it does. Look closely. Okay, so you can clearly see now it's not clipping in the plugin. And this is very powerful because guess what now you can do? You can actually do some processing to the 2-track beat. If you want to enhance some of the low end, if you want to bring down some of the highs, now you can, as opposed to before when you weren't clip gaining or gain staging before, you wouldn't be able to do that because you will literally be introducing clipping on clipping on clipping on clipping as you keep going down the line when it comes to your processing. So this is why this is extremely important to clip gain. That is tip number 1, clip gain or gain stage the 2-track beat before you actually start any processing on it. So you need to get that volume to a place where it's not clipping so that when you introduce processing, it won't be clipping. Okay, so that's the first thing, clip gain. Tip number 2, and this is something that I like to do a lot. I like to, and I'm gonna turn this off, I like to carve out a little bit of the mid-range. And why do I like to carve out a little bit of the mid-range? And when I say carve out, I'm talking about EQ. I like to carve out a little bit of the mid-range is because I want to add or create some space for the vocal. Granted, we don't have the tracked out beat, so it's not like we can move things around and pan them the way we want or EQ just certain parts. So what I like to do is I like to add a little bit of an EQ cut to about that 1 kilohertz range to basically free up some space for the vocal, just to give the vocal a little bit of space to actually cut through the mix. So let me show you what I mean. So we're going to come over to the 1 kilohertz range. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the beat. And as I'm playing the beat, I'm going to carve out just a little bit of that 1 kilohertz frequency range with a nice big Q in order to carve out some space for the vocal because we don't have the tracked out beat. So listen closely. Okay, now that I've carved out a little bit of that 2-track beat as far as that frequency range, I'm going to bypass it back and forth so you can hear exactly what the change we did. 1 second, let's turn it up just a little bit since we've clip gained it down a little bit. And listen closely. Okay, so I carved out a little bit of that frequency. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, well, the snare got a little lower and there was a certain frequency range that basically tucked under. Well, guess what? This is probably that frequency range that would be competing the most with your vocal. When it comes to that snare, especially that snare and that vocal, we're going to compete a lot. So what is good to do is, a healthy thing to do is carve out some of that and tame it so that when you put your vocals on top, it's not competing so much with that range, because that's the range where a lot of the presence and the meat of that vocal is going to live, is in that 1 kilohertz. Basically, I always say 2K to 4K. For me, I like to take out more of the 1K frequency, but that will vary depending on the instrumental that you have. For this particular one, I like to take out that 1K range, and I noticed that the snare got a little bit more tucked. And that's the way you know that you might have carved out the right frequency range, when you can feel that snare just come down just a little bit. And it's kind of like we just took the snare and just turned it down a little bit. And that's a powerful thing to do. So that's tip number 2, carving out that frequency range, carving out a little bit of the mid-range to make room for the vocal. Okay, last but most certainly not least, we're going to do tip 3. And tip 3 is adding analog saturation. Now, a lot of you guys always make fun of me when I say analog saturation because I'm doing it from a plugin. Obviously, these are analog modeled or analog emulation plugins, but they give you the idea or the feeling of analog saturation. Moving on. So basically what I like to do is I like to add analog saturation to my 2-track beats. And the reason is because most likely when the person or producer that sent you this beat bounced it, they had a limiter on it or they mastered it. And what happens is it kills a little bit of the dynamics of the movement of the actual instrumental. Now, when I put my vocals on and I put my mastering plugin on as far as a limiter, I want to still retain some of the dynamics in that beat, or I just like those little nuances as far as the difference between the quieter sound and the louder sound. When you put a limiter on, you destroy or you limit some of those dynamic characteristics as far as the difference between the quietest and the loudest. So what I want to do is with the analog saturation is I want to bring back some of those dynamics. So I have more dynamics in my actual mix for me personally. So this is what I do. And this is a very, very simple thing. I don't do much. So right here, I like to use, you can use any one of your analog saturation plugins that you love and adore. For me personally, when it comes to 2-track beats, I like to do use my NLS channel. And the reason why I like the NLS channel is because it's a very subtle analog emulation plugin as far as what it does. And it's basically just going to add a little bit of nuances to the beat to make it feel like it's moving just a little bit more as far as the difference between the quietest and loudest. I'll probably get a little bit more bump in my low end. I'll probably get a more wider sound. It's just a little bit of analog saturation is to add harmonics so that it feels a little bit more free, because you can't attack or turn up the faders because you don't have the tracked out beat. So I like to add this just to add a little bit more excitement to the 2-track beat. Listen close. I'll bypass back and forth without first. Okay, so to me personally, the one that got more exciting to my ear was when it was actually engaged. I noticed that I got a little bit more bump out of the low end, and I noticed that the snare, more of the top part of the snare actually raised up a little bit, which is great. Mind you, we still have the frequency cut to make room for the vocals, but now we have a little bit more excitement in the beat that we didn't have before off the strength of there wasn't any analog saturation and now it was a mastered beat. So it makes it a little bit more fun. It gives the actual instrumental a little bit more dynamics, and it sounds great to me personally. So now what did I do in my analog saturation plugin? All I did was add a little bit of drive to it. Now for you, your plugin, as far as your plugins is concerned, they're most likely, when it comes to analog saturation plugins, you have a button that says drive, or basically adding the amount. How much saturation do you want? For me, my button is drive, and I put 3 on the drive, which is a tad bit. It's like a quarter turn on the drive just to get a little bit more. Now you use this to your discretion as far as how much you want, but for me, it just was 3 on the drive. I'll leave this plugin actually in the description below. If you also wanted to follow along with me in this video, you can download this template that I use. I use my Rowdy Rich vocal type template, and you can get this from helpmedevon.info at any time if you want to follow along with it next time to kind of get it together. So basically, guys, that was just a really quick tutorial on basically 3 tips on how to mix vocals over a 2-track instrumental. It's really simple. I feel like a lot of people run into this issue and maybe don't even know this information as far as how to basically work your way around not having the tracked outs. And I know a lot of times we've all been there where we don't have the liberty to have the tracked out. So this is just a quick tutorial to show you how to basically get around it, how to get the best out of the 2-track nonetheless. So make sure you comment, like, subscribe. Any questions or concerns that you have, make sure you hit me down in the actual comments. Make sure you follow us at helpmedevon for more tips and things of that nature. You can email me at helpmedevon@gmail.com. And you can also head on over, like I said, to helpmedevon.info. If you're an Ableton user, Logic user, FL Studio user, or Pro Tools user, I have templates for you at our site. Also, for a lot of you that are probably using this tutorial, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how do I do this clip gaining or gain staging in my plugin or my program? There is a way. For instance, I know in Ableton, you guys have a plugin called Utility Gain, and that's where you would do that. So that would be the first plugin that you would put on to basically control it. In other programs, just make sure whatever you're doing at the very front of your inserts right here, that you are clip gaining, that you're putting a trim plugin on or something like that and turning it down first and foremost before you do any processing if you feel like it's mastered too much. So with that being said, until next time, you guys.